With another week of Stage 2 passing, it's time once again to return to my weekly Overwatch League Power Rankings prior to the first homestand weekend in Dallas. This past week of matches saw some of the biggest upsets of the season so far, as teams began to distinguish themselves between those who have realistic shots to compete for a playoff spot, and those on the flip side that are clearly lagging behind. So without any further delay, let's get straight into it. The bottom 5 this week sees 4 familiar faces, alongside one new arrival after a heavy fall on their part. At 20 remain the University of Waterloo, who still keep out the Florida Mayhem after they once again disappointed this week. The Washington Justice are also unchanged at 19. Down 4 positions we find the Houston Outlaws at 18, and then the Guangzhou Charge and LA Valiant at 17 and 16 respectively, after they both rose 1 spot this week. In direct contrast to the Mayhem, who themselves just seem to play consistently poorly week on week, with little sign of improvement, the Justice, whilst still struggling to find a win, have shown a noticeable degree of progress with their level of performances, now starting to give their opponents some competition. More importantly, I've really liked the roster changes they've been making, with their new pickup of Sleepy, a massive boost to his side, and for all the criticism management have received, I'm hopeful that the direction they're taking the team in at the moment continues if this lineup wants to find long-term success in the future. Houston are the biggest fallers of the week, and this drop has been coming for a very long time, perhaps only slowed by the odd interesting performance such as their series against Vancouver last week. Linkser clearly hasn't lost a beat when it comes to his quality on DPS heroes, as shown by the Outlaws' short-term success on triple DPS, whilst Dante has been putting in some dominant displays on Sombra over the past couple of weeks. However, for whatever reason, the team refuses to run these comps most of the time, except in some specific situations, which has forced them to play their traditional 3-3 goats, which is clearly one of the worst in the league. Their coordination when running this comp is almost non-existent, and it gives off the impression sometimes that the team is just ramming its head into the door over and over again. Unless we see a rapid improvement or a shift in style over the next couple of weeks, Houston may have to admit that their season is officially over. Both the Valiant and Charge only rise 1 spot as a direct result of Houston's fall, but for both sides, I seriously considered moving them higher after good performances this week. LA effectively dealt with the Justice to continue to lay the foundations for their comeback after their first ever win last week. Guangzhou meanwhile broke their mapless streak with a narrow loss to the Spark before a very surprising win over Atlanta on the back of the ever consistent Hotba alongside Eileen, who rejuvenated the side with his Doomfist play that teams have been struggling to handle. I hesitate to move any of these sides further up just yet, as their opponents this week I've still ranked relatively low, and while short term they've shown major improvements, I need to see this level of performance continue consistently over the next couple of weeks before I'm happy to put them higher. At 15 remains the Hangzhou Spark, as they are overtaken by the Atlanta Reign at 14 after rising twice. The Paris Eternal are unmoved at 13, as well as the Toronto Defiant at 12. As the bottom 10 is rounded out by the Boston Uprising, down 3 places to 11. Hangzhou continued their winning ways after their win over Boston last week by edging out the Charge in 5 maps, which following their victory over Atlanta doesn't look as bad of a result as it did initially. For the most part, it seems this side is finally starting to forge an identity for itself, with players like Goushue and Godsby impressing even in their 4-0 defeat to the Shock. But I'll need to see this level of performance continue over the next few weeks before I'm happy to raise them higher and truly believe in their potential that so often is praised in scrims. Oh Atlanta, what am I to make of a team that loses to the winless Valiant last week, but incredibly upsets the New York Excelsior at the beginning of this week, to then subsequently lose to one of the most out of form and weakest teams in the league afterwards? I brought them back up a little, as it's clear that the loss of Dako was a major part of their issues, and his return rediscovered some of the team's lost form, with Dogman also popping off quite a bit this week. But I need to see them again to find out which performance they showed gives us a more accurate idea of their true level. I haven't moved either Paris or Toronto, with the Eternal not playing this week, and the Defiant's only game an obvious 4-0 loss to San Francisco. To be honest, I think I'm being very generous to both of these sides, but particularly Toronto, who've looked dreadful lately, with Yakpung the main culprit in not providing any stable frontline for his side at main tank, as the squad on the whole clearly is struggling in ultimate management and team coordination. But given their tough strength of schedule, and with some much easier games coming up in the next couple of weeks, I'll let those series determine the fate of these sides moving forward. Boston, after a couple of horrible weeks, find themselves falling out of the top 10, In perhaps the worst way possible, they followed up last week's disappointing defeat to the Spark with a one-sided 4-0 loss to London, in which they found themselves always on the back foot, and struggled on their defences as well as coordination in clutch overtime moments. It is clear that their honeymoon period of picking up map 5 victories is over, with their defence particularly being targeted lately, including in their 4-0 loss to Vancouver, that saw the side become rather one-dimensional and panic with their ultimates in overtime. It's not all doom and gloom for the Uprising though, as shown by how competitive they made their series with the Titans, with some very dominant and effective attacks that highlighted what the team has the potential of doing behind their leader Fusions and the versatile effectiveness of RCK. I just fear that the blueprint for beating them has become a little obvious by focusing down Fusions, whilst Colourhex lately has been seriously failing to find much success with his Gravitons, is holding his side back, and it's these issues that could make the difference in whether this side can make the playoffs or not. Now entering the top 10, are the Chengdu Hunters rising once at 10, the Dallas Fuel down 3 times to 9, the Shanghai Dragons climb 2 spots to 8, the same amount as the Philadelphia Fusions who find themselves at 7, and lastly, the London Spitfire are just outside of my top 5 at 6, moving up 1 position. Beginning with Chengdu, they reluctantly rise only as Boston have fallen, and I just think that they would edge out a head-to-head game against the Uprising if the two sides played each other tomorrow. That said, the Hunters saw a second consecutive loss in as many weeks, most recently to the LA Gladiators, that whilst highlighting their strength when running triple DPS and bunker comps, that allowed particularly Jinmu to dominate and find the most success on assault maps, again showed that their main weakness was running goats that's been exposed in 2 consecutive weeks, first by Shanghai and now the Gladiators. This team has enough potential to sneak into the playoffs, but they cannot just rely on the map pool to benefit them in the upcoming games, but instead they need to rediscover some form on 3-3 that it showed off at the end of last stage. Dallas is one of those teams that is incredibly frustrating to rank week by week. As soon as I drop them, they start to go on a run of form, with OG particularly being a highlight for the side so far this stage. But the minute I give them any credit and rank them remotely highly, they falter, with the team looking really uncoordinated in their loss to Sol, especially during their attack of Eichenwald, that they really should have won. At this point, all I can say is that they most closely resemble a mid-table side that cannot be considered a proper playoff contender until they can show a level of consistency in their performances against both good and bad teams, especially as we head into their homestand weekend. Both Shanghai and Philadelphia see rises following a solid couple of weeks, but despite some tough opponents, have seen the sides pick up victories, but more importantly, begin to establish a level of consistency, with their main tanks, Gamsu and Sado, leading well, with both squads in a decent position to challenge for a playoff spot, depending upon their next results. A quick special mention to Ding of the Dragons, who arguably has been the most unstoppable player in the league the past 2 weeks on a wide variety of heroes, and he's been fundamental to his team's success. London just narrowly miss out on a top 5 spot, and in my estimation they are a much closer challenger to those teams than the others below them, as they've quietly worked their way through the stage unbeaten, with the team rediscovering its form and level of performance from last season, with Gesture especially enjoying playing Winston more often, alongside Prophet and Fury, who've re-established themselves as one of the strongest tank lines of this stage. And with Bedos and fragging in the backline, they have the potential to be a serious dark horse side come the stage playoffs if this continues. And finally, we have my top 5, that for another week remains unchanged, with the order from 5 to 1 seeing the Seoul Dynasty, the LA Gladiators, New York Excelsior, San Francisco, and Vancouver Titans who remain at the summit. Whilst the decision to play Marvel and Fitz still seems a little odd to me, I'm loving the rejuvenated partnership between Toby and Jaehong, which flourished in Seoul's dominant 4-0 win over Dallas this week. They are perhaps the most unpredictable side among those in the top 6, given their player swaps and coaching decisions, but this is shown to be as much of a strength for them as a weakness, and given their win over London at the end of last stage, I think that they would win the matchup again, hence why they are higher, although I reckon it would be a lot closer this time round. The Gladiators continued on their march toward an undefeated stage after a simple victory over Chengdu, with Decay once again showing why there was so much hype around him prior to the season, with a great game on both Sombra and Zarya. My only concern for this side is their ability to run non-3-3 comps that so far has been their bread and butter, with the Hunters map win of Hanamura highlighting that LA appeared to be a little unpracticed on triple DPS, which may hurt them come the playoffs in a couple of weeks. New York went from a good win over Philadelphia to being involved in one of the biggest upsets of the season so far with their loss to Atlanta this week. I do think this was a one-off, hence why they remain solidly at 3. But it did reveal the best ways to picking apart this side, which involves either taking out Jonak, who is the key pillar of this side, also by pressuring Mano, which was the aim of Daka and Pokpo, with his death often spelling the defeat for the Excelsior engagements. And I do wonder how they will adjust to these potential points of focus, and indeed if teams will follow them in the Reign's footsteps. To no one's surprise, the Shock and Titans take the top 2 spots, and are by far and away the best 2 teams in the league. San Francisco's map win record is crazy, and perhaps could be enough to put them ahead of Vancouver, where their performance is slightly stronger at the moment. But quite simply, until Vancouver is actually defeated, I don't see how I could drop them from the top spot, even if they have had a few hiccups this stage. With that, we've reached the end of my Stage 2 Week 3 Power Rankings, and I'd like to thank you for watching. In just a week, we've almost gone up 100 subscribers, which is crazy, and I can't thank you guys enough for the support recently. With the homestand weekend beginning later than normal this week, I've got some other video and analysis ideas planned in the coming days, so be sure to please like and subscribe, as well as follow me on Twitter so you don't miss out on this continuing Overwatch League content and coverage.